Welcome back to the 2-hour news show here on See Today. Indonesia and Germany have shared close ties since 1952, and that was formalized through a comprehensive partnership in 2012. This partnership includes joint efforts on climate issues, where Indonesia's global role is crucial, given its vast natural resources with Germany, and supports its move towards sustainable energy and conservation. And to find out more about this crucial partnership, and to explore the collaboration between Germany and Indonesia for the environment, joining us this afternoon is the German ambassador to Indonesia, ASEAN and Timor Leste, Her Excellency Ina Lepel, to discuss this matter further. Welcome, Ambassador. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, we know that Germany and Indonesia share a deep and multifaceted relationship and partnership, especially in areas such as climate and the environment. Now, from your perspective, what are some of the more critical pillars of this cooperation today, and how has it evolved over time?
Well, I think Indonesia has really evolved. Indonesia is an emerging economy and really a global player. And as such, we have this cooperation of global partners, because it's no longer the classical donor-recipient relationship, but really working together for the global good. And as you said, Indonesia's biodiversity is so important. Indonesia plays such an important role as an emitter also. So it makes so much sense to work together and to join forces. Because the problem with climate protection is greenhouse gases. And no matter where they come from, they do create the damage, they threaten livelihoods of people, they threaten lives of people. And so it's important to join forces, and that's why climate protection, energy transition, biodiversity preservation is such an important part of our collaboration between global partners.
Yeah, and it's great to see how the relationship has evolved over time, like you said. Now, what are some of the main reasons that Germany engages in climate policy with Indonesia, and what are some of the solutions that have been offered so far, and in regards to the progress to those solutions?
Yeah, well, I pointed out the problems. Indonesia has this amazing biodiversity. And we try to support Indonesia in preserving it, while at the same time making good livelihoods for the people concerned, because it only works if everybody wins and nobody is left behind. So we try to work with local communities and see for every single situation which approach might work to, on the one hand, protect nature, but also make it possible for people to have a good livelihood. So I remember visiting one project where there was a marine protected area, and the local people were shown, by example, that they actually made a better catch of fish if they let the fish grow a bit more, rather than already taking the small fish. So that worked for everybody. Nature got more fish, and the fishermen got also more fish.
Yeah, it's a good example of a win-win situation for both, and making that situation more sustainable. Obviously, marine protection is very important. Another thing that we often hear about is carbon trading. That's currently very high on the agenda as a system. In your opinion, is this a viable pathway?
Yes, I think if it is implemented properly, then it's a very viable pathway, because it incentivizes directly the emitters. Okay. It makes it more expensive for them to have lots of emissions, and therefore they feel that they either have to buy compensation or they have to really reduce their emissions. And whatever is more economic, probably they will do. So there are different varieties. There is voluntary carbon trading, which has already been in the market for many decades. And there is also compulsive carbon trading, which we have in the EU, and which has been going on for about 20 years now. So there is actually a carbon cap, and the system is called cap and trade. So there is a calculation about how much a single company can emit. So they either have to reach that target or buy emission certificates from someone else. And since the cap doesn't stay constant, but it's constantly reduced, it becomes more and more expensive to emit.
Good.
So at some point, it becomes unaffordable for a company to buy the compensation certificates. They really have to try and reduce. So our experience is that this has worked quite well. If I got my numbers right, they managed to reduce emissions by more than 40% since 2005, when this was first introduced.
Okay, so that's how the European emissions trading system works. In your point of view, what are some of the most important things when establishing a carbon trading system, regardless of which one it is?
Well, I think there has to be a very clear structure and good monitoring.
Okay.
In the European Union, we have a union registry where all the transactions between companies who sell each other emission rights are registered. So there can be no underhand deals. Everything has to be above board through that registry.
Okay.
So I think that's one important point. The legislation has to be clear, and there has to be good monitoring.
Okay.
And for the voluntary carbon trading, that has become a very competitive market. There are many countries in which relatively small efforts can bring a high gain in terms of reduced emissions. So there is a lot of competition between the countries who can do that, and then the reputation becomes important. So any country that really wants to benefit from that voluntary carbon trading have to make sure they have a good reputation for being sincere in their efforts at like reducing deforestation or at capping emissions from fossil burnings.
I think it's in regards to that, it's also important for all parties involved to make sure that everyone else is held accountable for everything that they do as well. Let's just shift our focus a little bit in regards to Germany itself. What steps are Germany taking at the moment to conserve natural carbon sinks back home? And what is the country's biggest source of emissions at this point?
Let me first of all talk about the natural carbon sinks.
Okay.
We have a couple, especially for, former peatlands that had been dried and that are now being renaturated. Germany has set aside 3.5 billion euro and from now until 2028 under its national biodiversity strategy and action plan. So, for instance, that serves to revive salt marshes or seaweed farming. We also have a bit of that, not just Indonesia. Another big area is re-wetting former peatlands, which seems to be coming along quite successfully, and also greening municipalities. This has been going on in 700 cities, and it's about planting trees, reviving ponds or small lakes that are in the urban area, or just creating more green lungs, parks, small gardens like that within the city. That's for the biodiversity. And in terms of energy, we have very ambitious goals for leaving coal. So Germany is planning to completely end coal-fired power plants by 2038, or if at all feasible, already by 2030. So this is something we're trying to do, and this has actually been quite successful. We closed 15 coal-fired power plants last year. And last year also the share of renewables in our energy mix for electricity was almost 60%. So we think we are on a good track, although it is not always easy to do that. It's always a bit controversial. But we feel, especially with the recent spike in oil prices, that going for renewables is really a good thing also for energy self-sufficiency. But of course, energy is only the sector that creates the most greenhouse gas emissions. We also have to work on energy efficiency for buildings, in the transport sector, in the maritime sector. So there is a lot to do, and we are really all working on it to get things done.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, I think we reported on some of those factories that have been closed down since last year as well here on the program. Looking back at Indonesia here, Indonesia is actually planning to start producing nuclear energy, speaking of renewables. So what is that like? What about in Germany?
Well, in Germany, we used to have nuclear energy
Right.
until about 2 years ago. And then we closed the last of them down because that had been decided in 2011 after the nuclear accident in Fukushima in Japan.
Right.
So we managed to completely conclude that chapter because we feel that the cost of nuclear energy over the entire life cycle, from creating the material to taking care of nuclear waste, is really extremely expensive, and it actually only worked while the sector was heavily subsidized by the government. And if one really accounts for all the costs, there are cheaper sources of energy.
That's true. Cost is a very important thing as well to consider when it comes to look for alternative sources of energy. Now, President Prabowo Subianto has actually said he's optimistic that Indonesia can become carbon neutral by the year 2050. Now, you mentioned earlier about some of the dates, some of the target dates, 2038 or 2030, if possible, to close down all coal-firing plants. Does Germany have a target date to reach carbon neutral as well?
We have a date of 2045.
Okay.
And the European Union has a target date also of 2050.
Correct. Yeah. So hopefully those targets are reached. From you personally, I mean, obviously you're very familiar with our country and our situation that we're in. Do you have any message for the Indonesian government?
Well, I think the Indonesian government has these ambitious growth targets of 8%, which is quite impressive. And our experience is that growth can be generated by transformation for greener economies. So that can trigger a lot of growth for jobs, for innovation. And so I think this should always be taken into account because it's good. It also saves future costs. A natural disaster of flooding or heat wave or just very bad pollution that creates a lot of sickness is something that is bad for growth. So in order to avoid such costs, it also makes sense to go for the green. So in our opinion, growth and green transformation go hand in hand.
All right. Now, speaking of going hand in hand, you mentioned that, the relationship between Germany and Indonesia has evolved over time. It's more of a partnership now. Obviously, Indonesia has learned much from Germany. But in your opinion, what can Germany learn from Indonesia when it comes to climate protection?
Well, I'm very impressed with the way young people address that and feel really an ownership for this important issue. I also admire the way Indonesia has a pretty open debate about this because obviously climate change protection does not come without cost. There is short-term cost and long-term benefits. And I think in the debate this is spelled out pretty clearly. And, but I'm quite optimistic that the people who say we have to be a bit careful now for long-term benefits are quite vocal and eloquent.
And, as I mentioned, you're very familiar with Indonesia. Apparently your bahasa Indonesia is quite good as well, so terima kasih for your time. Thank you for
Terima
your time.
kasih kembali, saya senang sekali.
Lovely to have you, Your Excellency, and thank you for this dialogue. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
All right, time for us to take a short break here. We hope that you were able to get much insight from this dialogue as well, and we look forward for a brighter future and partnership between Indonesia and Germany. We're going to take another short break here on the 2-Hour News Show, but when we return, Aris will join us to deliver more information from right here in Indonesia. Stay with us on the See Today News Network.